Hello everyone, I'm Freaky and welcome to the video. My friends, when it comes to the game Yu-Gi-Oh! And the anime, before we got the links and the pendulums and the X-Seeds and the synchros, you had the first series with Yugi and the second season with Jaden. I love watching the characters duel. I love the tricks that the characters do in their duels. It's all around fun. Now, before we add the X-Seeds, the synchros, the pendulums and the links, for me, I'm not really a fan of all these sort of cards. I mean, the X-Seeds, they're okay. The links are, they're okay. And I think the synchros actually restrict you a little bit, because you need certain cards to go inside your deck in order to bring them out. And of course, you've got those awful pendulum cards. So yeah, basically, I don't play the pendulums, and I rarely play the synchros. But I do like the X-Seeds and the links a little bit. They're all well and good. Back in the day, we used to tribute monsters, sacrifice one monster or two monsters, and on that rare occasion, 3 monsters. But there's one type of monster that was possibly the coolest thing that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has ever created or ever brought out, and that was the fusion monsters. And the first fusion monster that I ever saw in Yu-Gi-Oh! Was the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. Yeah, I didn't watch Yu-Gi-Oh! From the beginning. My first Yu-Gi-Oh! Episode was the episode when Yugi and Kaiba was in Duelist Kingdom, and Yugi had all of his starships, and Kaiba demanded that Yugi would duel him. And of course, Yugi accepted. But I wasn't at that part. Heck, I didn't even know what a Blue Eyes White Dragon was. I was just flipping through the channels, and I came across Yu-Gi-Oh! And I saw the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. And the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon was facing off against Karibo. Anyways, at the time, I didn't know the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon was a fusion. But when I did find out that it was a fusion monster, and it took 3 Blue Eyes to create the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, I thought that was freaking cool. And then after that, the rest was history, and I started watching Yu-Gi-Oh! And every time they fused 2 monsters, I thought it was freaking cool to have 2 monsters become one. Again, there was the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, there was the Black Skull Dragon, there was Meteor Black Dragon, there was Dog Paladin, there was Chimera, the Flying Mythical Beast, there was Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon, and also there was strange fusions like Gaia the Dragon Champion, which was supposed to be a combination between the Cursed Dragon and Gaia the Fierce Knight. And there was also Alligator Sword Dragon, which was a combination of Baby Dragon and Alligator Sword. There was also the XYZ Dragon Cannon. That was another strange case. And there was this really strange case of a fusion called the Dark Magicians. And all it was just Dark Magician and Dark Magician Girl on the same cover. I mean, come on, that is not a fusion. There was Dark Blade the Dragon Knight. And of course, you got yourselves the XYZ fusions. There was Dragon Master Knight. That was another strange case. And there was UFO-Roid Fighter. And last, but simply not least, there's also the new Gate Guardian fusions. Now originally, the Gate Guardian wasn't a fusion, but he was an effect monster that could be summoned from your hand if you have all of its parts on the field. But now, it's been updated, and now it is a fusion monster. It's kind of like the XYZ Dragon Cannons. So, you have the Gate Guardian, and you've got the Sangan and Suijin fusion, you have the Sangan and Kazajin fusion, and so on fusions. The Gate Guardian has been updated for a new generation, and these monsters are fusions. But again, this is a very strange case. Now, before I say as to why all these cards are strange, just let me ask you guys something. When you think of fusion, what exactly do you think of? You think of 2 characters becoming one. Like for example, when you put Goku and Vegeta together with the Pataras, you get Vegito. And when they do the fusion dance, they get Gogeta. And that's exactly what a fusion is supposed to be. It's supposed to be 2 people becoming one. And yes, I know this is Dragon Ball Z and not Yu-Gi-Oh! But I'm just trying to make a point. It's 2 characters becoming one. So let me give you a few examples from Yu-Gi-Oh! I mean, look at Jaden's fusion monsters from GX. They are monsters becoming one. Like for example, Flare Wingman. And he's a fusion between Bestinatrix and Wingman. And you know what? That is a perfect example of a fusion. And Jaden's got loads of these things. Shining Flare Wingman, Thunder Giant, Mudball Man, etc, etc. Again, look at the Dark Paladin, which is a fusion between the Dark Magician and Buster Blader. Basically what I'm trying to say is, when it comes to fusions and polymerizations and all that stuff, you would expect something. 2 beings becoming one. Sharing the same mind, they gain a new ability, and they're much more powerful than their materials. And you know what? That's exactly what a fusion should be. 2 beings mixed into one. Now, there are some cases when a monster fuses and they have 2 heads. Like for example, the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, which is a fusion between 3 Blue Eyes. There's also the Blue Eyes Twin Burst Dragon, which is a combination between 2 Blue Eyes. There's also Chimera, the Flying Mythical Beast. There's the Cyber End Dragon, which has 3 heads. Basically, they share the same body, but they don't share minds. Or there's the Cyber Twin Dragon, which is a combination between 2 Cyber Dragons, and they can attack twice. So it is a mixed bag when it comes to monsters that have fused into one, but they've either got 2 or 3 heads, so they share the same body but not the same mind. Anyways, you have a fusion between 2 monsters. Again, for example, Dark Paladin, which is a mixture of Dark Magician and Buster Blader, and they become one being in body and mind. And sometimes you would fuse 2 monsters together, but they would share the same body, but not the same mind because they've got 2 heads. But they still count as one monster, in body but not in mind. But there's also the strange case fusions when it comes to certain fusions. Again, like Gaia the Dragon Champion, you've got Alligator Sword Dragon, and of course you've got the Gate Guardians, the new upgraded version of the Gate Guardian. And it's a fusion. And not just that, like the X, Y, and Z Dragon Cannon materials, where you can fuse any 2 of these into one. Kazajin, Suijin, and Sangan can also fuse with each other, or combined. Again, something similar to XYZ Dragon Cannon. But the thing is, when it comes to XYZ Dragon Cannon and the Gate Guardian, the new one, they haven't fused into one being. They're actually 3 entities that's combined into one. So really, you can't really call them fusions if they haven't fused into one being. They're just connected to each other, like a sort of Lego. I mean, come on, Gaia the Fierce Knight is basically sitting on the Cursor Dragon, and he became Gaia the Dragon Champion. And look at Darkblade and Dark Dragon. All Darkblade is doing is just sitting on Dark Dragon. I mean, come on, you cannot call that a fusion. You can't call XYZ Dragon Cannon a fusion. You can't call the Gate Guardian a fusion. You can't call Gaia the Dragon Champion a fusion. You can't call Alligator Sword Dragon a fusion. They haven't fused into one being. They're just connected to each other, or they're just sitting on one another. And when it comes to this, the fact that you have 2 monsters, like Cursor Dragon or Gaia the Fierce Knight, and you use a fusion to make Gaia the Dragon Champion, like, this shouldn't even be called a fusion. Again, a fusion is when 2 entities become one. But when you look at certain fusions like Gaia the Fierce Knight, Darkblade, the XYZs, the new Gate Guardians, Alligator Sword and Baby Dragon, etc., you know, those sort of fusions, where 2 entities are connected but not fused into one. Again, like the XYZ, ABC monsters. Kind of like a union of 2 monsters. It would kind of be sort of like those union monsters that we used to have back in the day, like the Giant Orc and the Second Goblin. And the Second Goblin has the ability to change the position of Giant Orc each turn. So basically, if Giant Orc was to attack, it would go into defense. But Second Goblin, if equipped to Giant Orc, is able to switch it back to attack mode. It would be something like that. They're 2 monsters complementing each other. It's not a fusion of 2 monsters. You just equip one monster to another monster. And that's a union that I can get behind. And there are quite a few other union monsters that you can equip to other monsters. And those monsters complement the other monster if equipped. Again, like Giant Orc and Second Goblin. Or, here's another example. Let's have a look at the Batterymen monsters. Now, I'm not going to lie, I have absolutely no idea how these monsters work, but I just want to do an example of something. Now, when you look at these monsters, they look like batteries, and they would look like something that you would put in a remote or something like that. So, let's just say for example, because I have absolutely no idea what the effects of these monsters are. Let's just say for example, that there was a monster, say for example, a monster called Giant Toy. The Batteryman's effect could be Batteryman C can be equipped to Giant Toy, and if it is equipped to Giant Toy gets a boost of 1500. So Batteryman C would be an equipped monster, or Batteryman 3 could give Giant Toy a 2000 multiplier, or Batteryman AA can be equipped to Giant Toy, and Giant Toy gains 800 attack points. And listen, this is something that I've made up. This isn't the actual effect of these monsters, and Giant Toy is something that I've just made up. And you know what? I can totally get behind something like this. When it comes to union monsters, I can totally see what they were trying to do with this, having little monsters attach themselves to even bigger monsters as equip spells. I can totally get behind that. But the thing is, this wouldn't make union monsters fusion monsters. It would just make them equip monsters. But when you look at something like Gaia the Fierce Knight and Cursor Dragon, and they become one to become Gaia the Dragon Champion, I mean really, you can't equip Cursor Dragon to Gaia the Fierce Knight like you would with Giant Orc and Second Goblin. That would take away the coolness away from Gaia the Dragon Champion. And yes, I know, Gaia the Dragon Champion is a very old card that nobody uses anymore. But listen, I do have a point of what I'm trying to say. And listen, I'm not saying that, oh, I want a Gaia the Fierce Knight and Cursor Dragon update where they turn into union monsters. Something similar to Giant Orc and Second Goblin. No, nothing like that. I mean, come on, Gaia the Dragon Champion looks cool, and just having them as union monsters would just take away the coolness. But I do believe fusion monsters like Gaia the Dragon Champion, the new Gate Guardian cards, the XYZs, the Dark Magicians, Dark Blade, etc., should be given updates. And, in fact, I have a few ideas on how they could treat these sort of fusions. Remember, XYZ and the ABC, Gaia the Dragon Champion, Dark Blade, the Gate Guardian, and other fusions like these aren't fused into one entity, but they're two entities, or three entities, that are either riding on each other, like Gaia the Dragon Champion, or are connected like the XYZ Dragon Cannon, or the new Gate Guardian, or you have Dark Blade that's riding on Pitch Dark Dragon. And to be honest, these sort of fusions need to have their own category. And I'm not talking about something new like the Lynx, the Exceeds, the Synchros. No, nothing like that. These sort of monsters would still be called fusion monsters, but it would be called a union fusion. And I'm going to be telling you guys my idea on what they could do with these union fusions. And basically, again, union fusions is something like the Gate Guardian, Gaia the Dragon Champion, XYZ Dragon Cannon, Dark Blade, etc. And so, just for reference, I'm going to be using the XYZ Dragon Cannon, the Gate Guardian, Alligator Sword Dragon, Gaia the Dragon Champion, and Dark Blade, the Dragon Knight. I'm going to be using these monsters in an example of what I'm trying to say when it comes to union fusion, and I'll be explaining the rules of union fusion as well. And so, let's go. And so, I'm going to be showing you guys my idea on how union fusion monsters work. Some ideas are from the show, some rules that I've made up, and these rules are all prototypes. And yes, I know for a fact that these sort of rules will never ever be played in Yu-Gi-Oh! But, number one, I'm doing this for fun, and number two, it's just something to talk about. And number three, I want to know what my fellow Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans think of these rules. And I want you guys to tell me what you think of these rules of Union Fusion. And so that said, here's the rules of Union Fusion. Rule number one, the monsters that makes up the Union Fusion monster is counted as two or more monsters. So let's just say, for example, that I fused Gaia the Dragon Champion and he was on the field, and instead of Gaia the Dragon Champion being counted as one monster, it would actually be counted as two monsters. Because remember, Union Fusion isn't like when two beings fuse into one. It's actually two beings complementing each other. Or here's another example. Let's have a look at the Dark Magicians, and it's obvious that this is a combination of the Dark Magician and the Dark Magician Girl. I mean, come on, how the hell is this a fusion? Anyways, it's the same with the Dark Magicians. The Dark Magicians would be counted as two monsters. Or let's have a look at the new Gate Guardian combined. And when it comes to this monster, since it took three material monsters to summon this monster, Suijin, Kazajin, and Sangan, because again, look at it, it's three monsters as one. So, Gate Guardian would count as three monsters. So, you guys basically got the general idea of what I'm trying to say here. It depends on how many material monsters is needed to summon a Union Fusion monster. So again, if somebody was to summon the Dark Magicians or Gaia the Dragon Champion, then the Dark Magicians and Gaia the Dragon Champion would count as two monsters and not one monster. So let's just say, for example, that I summoned the Dark Magicians and that fusion was the only one on the field. It would count as two monsters. And if I was to summon Gate Guardian combined, it would count as three monsters. So yeah, you guys basically know what I'm trying to say. Depending on how many fusion materials that is needed for the Union Fusion, again like Gate Guardian combined or Gaia the Dragon Champion, these fusions would count as more than just one monster. Like Gate Guardian combined counts as three monsters and Gaia the Dragon Champion would count as two. So for future references, if there was a fusion monster that combined four monsters that's similar to Gaia the Dragon Champion or Gate Guardian combined, so that monster would count as four monsters. So let's just say, for example, that I summoned Gaia the Dragon Champion and the Gate Guardian combined on the mat in the monster zones and the Dark Magicians. These monsters would take up one monster zone each. So basically, you'll have yourself 7 monsters on the field. Well, kinda sorta. So yeah, you guys basically know what I'm trying to say. These Union Fusions count as multiple monsters. And so, let's just say, for example, that Gaia the Dragon Champion is on the field, and I've got myself a Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon in my hand, and I want to summon it to the field, then you'd be able to sacrifice Gaia the Dragon Champion to summon the Blue Eyes White Dragon, because Gaia the Dragon Champion would count as 2 monsters. Or, here's another one. Let's just say, for example, that you've got Gate Guardian combined on the field, and you've got yourself Obelisk the Tormentor in your hand, then you'd be able to sacrifice Gate Guardian to summon Obelisk the Tormentor, because Gate Guardian combined counts as 3 monsters. So yeah, there you go. Or, let's just say, for example, that you got yourself Gaia the Dragon Champion on the field, and you got yourself a Jinzo in your hand, and you wanted to summon Jinzo by sacrificing Gaia the Dragon Champion, then you'd be able to do that. But since Gaia the Dragon Champion counts as 2 monsters, and Jinzo only needs 1 monster to be tributed in order for you to summon Jinzo, then you can sacrifice Gaia the Dragon Champion and summon Jinzo. But not only that, since you sacrificed Gaia the Dragon Champion, you can also special summon either Cursed Dragon or Gaia the Fierce Knight from your graveyard to the field. So depending on which monster that you've resummoned from Gaia the Dragon Champion, you've basically sacrificed either Cursed Dragon or Gaia the Fierce Knight. But you are allowed to bring back either Cursed Dragon or Gaia the Fierce Knight back to the field. So now you got yourself Jinzo and either Cursed Dragon or Gaia the Fierce Knight on the field. So yeah, there you go. Okay, that's rule number 1. Let's move on to rule number 2. Rule number 2 is you don't need a polymerization or a defusion to summon the Union Fusion monsters. Because again, the polymerization combines 2 monsters and they become 1 being. But when it comes to Union Fusion monsters, all you need to do is either have them on the field or in your hand. Or if one is on the field and one is in your hand. For example, if you have Gaia the Fierce Knight on the field and you've got Cursed Dragon in your hand, you can send them both to the graveyard and special summon Gaia the Dragon Champion. Or if you have both Gaia the Fierce Knight and Cursed Dragon on the field, you send them both to the graveyard and then you can summon Gaia the Dragon Champion. Same applies with the Gate Guardian combined. If you've got 2 of its materials in your hand and 1 on the field, you can send them to the graveyard to summon Gate Guardian combined. And you can also do it if you have your material monsters in your hand. You send them to the graveyard from your hand and summon your Union monster. But there's a catch to this. If you summon your Union Fusion monster this way, by sending your Union Fusion monsters from your hand to the graveyard in order to summon your Fusion Union monster, then you can't do a certain thing, which I am going to explain in rule number 3. And in rule number 3, if you have summoned your Union Fusion monster by sending its materials from the field, or at least 1 Fusion material monster, and the others are in your hand, then during your turn, you can send your Union Fusion monster back to its extra deck and special summon its materials at any time during your turn. And you can send your material monsters back to the graveyard to special summon your Union Fusion monster back to the field. However, here comes the rule when it comes to sending your material monsters, all of them, from your hand to the graveyard. If you was to summon your Union Fusion monster this way, then you wouldn't be able to defuse the monsters until your second standby phase. I thought I'd just give this way of fusion a little bit of a handicap. So yeah, there you go. If you sent your Fusion material monsters from your hand to the graveyard, all of them, and special summoned your Union Fusion monster, then you can't unfuse them until your second standby phase. And also, let's just say for example that you have a Union Fusion material monster on the field, say for example Cursed Dragon, and you want to summon Gaia the Dragon Champion, but Gaia the Fierce Knight is in your deck and you don't have him in your hand yet, then that's okay. Because when it comes to Union Fusion material monsters, if you was to summon a Union Fusion material monster to the field, you can search your deck for that material monster and add it to your hand. But you're not allowed to Union Fusion until your next turn. Yeah, I thought it would be a little bit overpowered, so I added this condition. Like I said, this was just for fun. So yeah, there you go. And so let's look at rule number 4. And rule number 4 is, if your opponent is about to attack your Union Fusion monster and it's about to be destroyed by battle, then you can send your Union Fusion monster to the graveyard and special summon its materials. So let's just say for example that you had Gate Guardian combined on the field in attack mode, and say for example your opponent had Obelisk the Tormentor and he attacked your Gate Guardian combined. You would be able to send Gate Guardian combined to the graveyard and special summon Sangan, Kazajin and Suijin to the field and place them in the positions that Gate Guardian was in before you sent it to the graveyard. So let's just say for example that your Gate Guardian combined was in attack position and Obelisk the Tormentor attacked Gate Guardian. You will be able to send Gate Guardian to the graveyard and special summon in attack position Suijin, Kazajin and Sangan, and they need to be in attack position. But let's just say for example that Gate Guardian combined was in defense position and Obelisk the Tormentor attacked Gate Guardian. You can send Gate Guardian to the graveyard and special summon Kazajin, Sangan and Suijin to the field in defense position. Because remember, Gate Guardian counts as 3 monsters, so Obelisk the Tormentor would have to choose one of your Gate Guardian pieces. And since Obelisk the Tormentor destroyed one of your Gate Guardian pieces and it's in the graveyard, you can't special summon Gate Guardian because one of its pieces is in the graveyard and the others are on the field. It would be the same if there was Gaia the Dragon Champion. because remember, Gaia the Dragon Champion counts as 2 monsters. So if Obelisk the Tormentor was to attack Gaia the Dragon Champion, you send Gaia the Dragon Champion to the graveyard and special summon both Cursed Dragon and Gaia the First Knight on the field, and your opponent chooses which monster Obelisk attacks. So yeah, that's rule number 4. Let's move on to rule number 5. And rule number 5 is Union Fusion monsters can attack twice or more depending on its fusion material monsters. So again, let's just say for example that Alligator Sword Dragon is on the field, and since Alligator Sword is the combination of 2 material monsters, Baby Dragon and Alligator Sword, then that means you can attack twice. Or is another example, there's also the Gate Guardian combined, and since Gate Guardian combined is a combination of 3 monsters, then Gate Guardian combined can attack 3 times. So yeah, that's basically it. Depending on how many Union Fusion material monsters that was used to bring out your Union Fusion monster, you can attack as many times depending how many material monsters that was used for this Union Fusion. So yeah, there you go. And so let's go on to the next one. And rule number 6 is the Union Fusion monster can use its materials effects. Now, I couldn't find a suitable candidate to show you guys as an example, but I'll just have to improvise and just make something up for certain cards. And so, here we go. Now, let's just say, for example, that Cursor Dragon had the ability to destroy all field spell cards, and no field spell card can be activated as long as Cursor Dragon is on the field. And yes, I know that Cursor Dragon doesn't have an effect, but I'm just saying this as an example. And let's have a look at Gaia the First Knight. Let's just say, for example, Gaia the First Knight's effect was, when this card attacks a defense post monster, you can inflict battle damage like you would if the monster was in attack mode. So basically, Gaia the First Knight's effect would be basically Varian Meteor Crush. It does piercing damage, but then if you was to Union Fusion Gaia the Dragon Champion, then Gaia the Dragon Champion will have its own effect, or not. But not only that, it will also have the effects of both Cursor Dragon and Gaia the First Knight. So all field spell cards on the field are destroyed and can't be activated as long as this monster is on the field. And you can also do piercing damage, just like Gaia the First Knight. Because again, Union Fusion monsters counts as 2, and they make up the material monsters. So Gaia the Dragon Champion gets both Cursor Dragon and Gaia the First Knight's abilities. And if they want to, they can add an ability for Gaia the Dragon Champion. So yeah, it would have 3 effects. One from Cursor Dragon, one from Gaia the First Knight, and one effect of its own. Like maybe, for example, all dragons on the field, besides from Gaia the Dragon Champion, loses 500 attack points and defense points, or they don't have to give him an effect. It depends on the Union Fusion monster, and this can happen for all Union Fusion material monsters. The Union Fusion monster gains its materials effects. So yeah, there you go. And with that said, let's move on to rule number 7. And rule number 7 is the Union Fusion monsters attribute and type becomes both. So let's just say, for example, that you have Gaia the First Knight and Cursor Dragon. Cursor Dragon is a dragon type, and Gaia the First Knight is a warrior type, and Cursor Dragon's attribute is darkness, and Gaia the First Knight's attribute is earth. So Gaia the Dragon Champion's type and attribute would be thus. Its attribute would be darkness and earth, and its type would be dragon warrior or warrior dragon. So yeah, it's basically combining the 2. So let's just say, for example, you add a magic card or a monster effect that made all earth monsters on the field gain 500 attack points, and you add Gaia the Dragon Champion, which is a Union Fusion monster. It will also be an earth attribute monster, so Gaia the Dragon Champion would get that boost. Or let's just say, for example, that a spell card or a monster effect card affected dragon types, like for example, all dragon types on the field cannot attack you directly, and since Gaia the Dragon Champion is half dragon, he wouldn't be able to attack your opponent's life points directly. So yeah, Union Fusion monsters would get half of their material monsters, both types and attributes. So Gaia the Dragon Champion would be both dark and earth, and he would be a warrior and a dragon. So yeah, there you go. And so, let's move on to rule number 8. Now, rule number 8 is for monsters that have more than 2 material monsters for its fusion. For example, XYZ Dragon Cannon. Now, to some of you who may or may not know, the XYZ Dragon Cannon monsters also has other fusions, like for example, the YZ Tank Dragon. That's also one of its fusions, and it's got 2 other fusions as well. So, let's just say, for example, that you've got YZ Tank Dragon on the field, and when it comes to your turn, and you've got Exec Cannon in your hand, and you summon it to the field, you can send YZ Tank Dragon and Exec Cannon to the graveyard. You can special summon XYZ Dragon Cannon to the field. So yeah, it's basically that. So basically, if you have a Union Fusion monster on the field like YZ Tank Dragon, and then you summon Exec Cannon to the field, you can send YZ Tank Dragon an extra cannon to the graveyard. And this can be for any fusion monster that has more than 2 fusions. Here's another example. Let's just say, for example, that you've got the fusion monster of Sangan of Thunder and Kazajin on the field. And then if you was to summon Suijin to the field, then you'd be able to send the fusion monster and Suijin to the graveyard in order to bring out Gate Guardian combined. It would kind of be something like that. So yeah, those are all the rules. And also, you could defuse the monsters and refuse them at any time during your turn. They can be their individual materials, or they can be their union form without any polymerization or defusion. Oh, and also, defusion doesn't work on union fusion monsters, either by you or your opponent, either on your monster or on your opponent's monster. Only the rightful owner is allowed to defuse them. And oh, I've also got another rule, which is rule number 9. So let's just say, for example, that your opponent was to take control of your union fusion monster, like for example, brain control or change of heart or snap steal or whatever effect that will get onto your opponent's side of the field. You can defuse your union fusion monster, and your opponent would have to take one of your material monsters that made up your union fusion monster. So at the very least, he isn't taking your union fusion monster, but instead he'll be taking its material monsters that made up the union fusion. Okay, and with that said, let's move on to rule number 10. Your opponent cannot take control of any of your union fusion monsters. So let's just say, for example, that your opponent tries to use, I don't know, like snap steal or change your art on your union fusion. Your opponent won't be able to take control of it, because remember, union fusion is 2 monsters in one. Unless the union fusion monster is in its materials, then you can snap steal one of those monsters. And if that happens, you won't be able to fuse your Guy the Dragon Champion and Cursor Dragon. So let's just say, for example, that your Cursor Dragon and your Guy the First Knight is on the field, and your opponent uses Snap Steal on one of them. Then that means you wouldn't be able to bring out your Union Fusion monster. So yeah, there you go. And so let's move on to rule number 11. And rule number 11 is, if you was to equip anything to a Union Fusion monster, you have to declare which of its materials you're attaching it to. So that way, when you fuse it and defuse it, it will attach itself to the declared monster. And this can be anything from equipped spells, equipped traps, and monsters that equip themselves to monsters. And it's the same with the opponent. If he equips a monster or a trap or a spell card to a Union Fusion monster, he has to declare which Union Fusion monster that he's equipping it to. So let's just say, for example, that you attached Horn of the Unicorn to Gaia the Dragon Champion, and you declared that you're attaching it to Gaia the Dragon Champion, and declared you're attaching it to Cursor Dragon, for example. So then, when you summon back your material monsters, your Horn of the Unicorn will be attached to Cursor Dragon, and when you refuse, the equipped spell will be attached to Gaia the Dragon Champion. But once it's declared, and if you use to refuse your monsters, it will still be attached to your Union Fusion monster. So yeah, and so let's move on to rule number 12. Now, when it comes to your opponent attacking your Union monster, you can turn back your Union monster to its materials, and your opponent has to attack one of the material monsters. But when it comes to rule number 12, let's just say, for example, that your opponent has a monster on his side of the field, and that monster has the ability to destroy one monster on the field. So let's just say, for example, that your opponent uses his monster ability to target your Union Fusion monster. Then you would have to split apart your Union monster into its materials. Then your opponent will choose one of the material monsters to destroy, and then it will be sent to the graveyard. But let's just say, for example, that your opponent has Raigeki, and he used it. And Raigeki destroys all your opponent's monsters on the field. So let's just say, for example, that a Union monster is on the field, and your opponent uses Raigeki, and you've got a Union Fusion monster, and your opponent uses Raigeki. Then your Union Fusion monster has to go to the grave, and you can't summon your fusion material monsters that made up your Union Fusion. So yeah, there is a difference between targeted and destroy all. If you're a Yu-Gi-Oh player, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, now let's move on to rule number 13. And rule number 13 is, let's just say, for example, that your Union Fusion material monsters is in the graveyard, and your Union Fusion monster is on the field. But if for some reason your material monsters have either been banished or sent back to your deck, then you can't split apart your Union Fusion monster to its materials. So your Union Fusion monster has lost the ability to defuse, unless you can send back your material monsters back to the graveyard. So yeah, well that's it. I think I've got everything. This was just a little idea I thought up. And yeah, sure, it was all for fun, and it's not real, but if you can make the rules of Union Fusion any better, please let me know in the comments below, and let's get a discussion going. So yeah, that's all I gotta say about Union Fusion monsters. And yeah, the rules for Union Fusion needs a bit of polishing up, but to be honest, I really do like this idea for certain fusion monsters. They're not fusing to one, but they're actually complementing each other. I mean, come on, you are not fusing Dark Magician and Dark Magician Girl into one, and creating the Dark Magicians. I mean, come on, how the heck is that fusion? And look at Gaia the Dragon Champion. It hasn't fused into one, nor the Get Guardian, nor Alligator's Sword and Baby Dragon. They've either combined or they're just riding on each other. And that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to bring in a good idea on what they could use for future cards. So yeah, that's all I gotta say about this. So, what do you guys think? Am I right? Am I wrong? Do you like my ideas of Union Fusion? Please let me know in the comments below, and let's get a discussion going. I'm Freaky. Peace out. And please don't forget to check out my other social medias. Please go and check out my alternative video platforms: Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Twitch, and please come and hang out on my Discord server. We can play games, have a movie night or a series night, or you can watch me play a few games. And if you guys have any suggestions of any videos you want me to react to, or any video ideas in general, you can tell me on my Discord. I'm also on Twitter, Gab, Getter, and Parler. I'm on Locals, Tumblr, Minds, and if you guys want to support me, please go and check out my Subscribestar. It's like Patreon, but better. All these things are in the description box below, so please go and check them out and subscribe to them. I'm Geek Freak. Peace out.